and welcome to the COVID-19 live Q&A. So this is the latest in our series of regular events on COVID-related issues in our community platform. I'm delighted to be joined by Kerry McLeod, who's the Head of Information Content at Mind, and Amy-Louise Murray, who is an Information Officer at Mind. So yeah, thank you so much for both joining us.
Thank you, it's lovely to be here. Good to meet everyone.
And just to kick things off, and yeah, hello Gozi, yeah, please feel free to use the chat function as well. And yeah, to kick off, most of us will be aware of Mind, but perhaps not aware of the full scope of the charity. Can you tell us a bit more about yourselves and the type of support that you provide?
Yeah, sure. So we are a mental health charity, and we work across England and Wales. Our mission is to make sure that everyone with a mental health problem gets the support and respect they deserve. So we offer advice and support. We campaign for better access to services and to raise awareness of mental health. We have a federated network of local minds. So they are independent charities that operate across England and Wales, and they're affiliated to the kind of national Mind, which is what we call ourselves. And they offer services that are kind of designed to work for the local area that they work in. And then the bit of Mind that Amy and I work in, we provide information on all aspects of living with a mental health problem, which you can see on our website. We have an info line which you can call for signposting to local services or kind of more specialist services near you and for information. And we also have an online peer support community called Side by Side. Thank
you so much for that answer. When the pandemic happened, did you notice a difference in the types of support that people were seeking?
Yeah, we did, is the short answer. It was a time of rapid change, I think, for everyone, wasn't it? And we tried to respond to that in terms of the information that we offered. So we created a coronavirus information hub on our website, which started off as kind of one page that aimed to support people with their well-being while isolating, and then kind of became something much bigger. And then new information needs emerged, people who still had to go out to work during the lockdown, people who were having trouble accessing support and services for their mental health, coping with sort of experiences and feelings as we sort of came out of lockdown. So the kind of, the need grew, and just as a sort of snapshot, on one particular day in March 2020, we had 68,000 views of that one coronavirus information page. So yeah, there was a real kind of increase in demand, and our helpline kind of started a bit more slowly, but we started to get a lot more calls as the sort of spring turned into summer.
And I think you've spoken a bit about that, but how have you felt it's changed, and what is the sort of situation right now?
So now it's changed. The kind of the visits to our main coronavirus information have sort of dipped, but interest, or like visits to our other information, sort of especially around things like anxiety, which I know we're going to talk about today, have increased, but across all of our information have increased. And we know that on our helpline, we've had callers who are experiencing long COVID, calling about the sort of impact of that on their mental health. So we've seen that as well.
Mm-hmm. And Amy-Louise, I was wondering if I could ask you, what do anxiety disorders look like?
Thank you. So firstly, something to address is that there's a big difference between being anxious and having an anxiety disorder. So it's important to remember that so many people feel anxious from time to time, but if that anxiety is starting to have more of an impact on your day-to-day life and your well-being, that might be when you might want to think about getting some help or support. And there are lots of different types of anxiety disorders. So like, for example, generalized anxiety disorder relates to having kind of regular or uncontrollable worries about things in your everyday. There's also social anxiety and panic disorder, health anxiety, body dysmorphia, perinatal anxiety, to name but a few. So there's so many different types, and anxiety disorders look very, very different for everybody. And it would be impossible for me to sit and list all of the symptoms of anxiety disorders, because I'd probably be here for a long time, but it does look very, very different for everybody. Now, the symptoms of anxiety, an anxiety disorder can affect not just your mind, but it can affect your body, and it can affect the way that you function from day to day and live your life. So as an example, some people who are anxious may get like a churning feeling in their stomach. Some people feel lightheaded and dizzy from time to time. They may have a racing heartbeat. Some people feel tense. Some people feel nervous. Some people feel unable to relax, or they may have a persistent feeling of dread. Some people may experience panic attacks. Some people experience hot flushes, problems with sleep. Many people with anxiety feel like they can't stop worrying and fear the worst. And as a result of all of that, some people may avoid certain situations because of their anxiety, or find it difficult to enjoy time with friends, relatives, loved ones, or just look after themselves day to day. So there's a lot there's a lot in there, and we do at Mind, we produce a lot of high quality information about anxiety disorders generally, and what we'll do is we'll send a link at the end of the session, so you can read up about anxiety, the symptoms, causes, and that sort of thing. But yeah, that's kind of like a whistle-stop tour on what an anxiety disorder might look like for somebody.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of stressors, what is a stressor, and what can be the main types of stressors for anxiety disorders?
Yeah, so a stressor, I guess, could be defined as something that may set off or trigger, I guess, your anxiety or your anxious behaviour. And what we've noticed at Mind is that there's been a difference in the types of anxieties people are experiencing throughout the pandemic. So towards the beginning of the pandemic, some of our information that we have on our website, we were talking a lot about anxiety in relation to ongoing changes to routines. So with all of the different lockdowns, it affected us being able to go outside and engage with things that we usually would. A lot of us worked from home at that time. We went from face-to-face interactions to engaging in a very, very different way. And for many, that was incredibly anxiety inducing. There was also high levels, as we all know, there were high levels of uncertainty, particularly in the first sort of year, and we had frequent changes to rules and regulations and what we could and couldn't do. So we noticed a lot of that coming through in some of our research. Many people had concerns about getting unwell from COVID, understandably, or having their friends and family getting sick, particularly those who were shielding or were clinically extremely vulnerable. Anxieties were coming through about work. A lot of people were placed on furlough. Some people lost a lot of people lost their jobs as a result of COVID. A lot of people who were parents were having to juggle being a homeschool teacher and jobs at the same time, and as a result of all that, people were very concerned about their finances as well. There were anxieties, of course, about being away from our family, our friends, our loved ones, people we care about, and worry about further restrictions and lockdowns, and what might happen next. Again, sort of that uncertainty. And in relation to kind of long COVID, so at Mind, this isn't, so we've done a couple of COVID-19 research studies at Mind, but long COVID is something we haven't really looked into as so much yet, but we are monitoring this, and we're kind of having a look at the sort of research that is starting to evolve, and some of the anxieties that people are talking about are very similar, but have some very specific stressors, I guess. So, for example, there feels a lot of anxiety about the uncertainty about the future that kind of comes with having a long-term illness. So having an illness that affects your quality of life in some way or another means that people may be reflecting and thinking about what they now can't do as a result of that, and worrying about the impact that that might have on their future, their future work, their future plans. And with that comes fears about health. So maybe not being able to get back to the levels of health and fitness and ability that you may have had kind of before contracting COVID. So that's something that we're noticing in some of the research coming through. Stresses and anxieties about being off work still. So if you have long COVID and you've had to take an extended period of time off work, that will be causing a lot of anxiety, particularly depending on how understanding your employer is with all of that, which then leads on to a financial implication. Concerns around relationships with friends and family being affected. So the implications of maybe not being able to do as much as you used to be able to, and kind of worrying about how that might have an impact on your relationships with those around you. And for many who have experienced long COVID in relation, who may have also experienced trauma as a result of having an illness, a potentially fatal illness, there is a lot of concern about people potentially getting COVID again, and sort of living with the aftermath of just being very, very unwell, and the stress and anxiety that comes with that. We know at Mind there is a link, a massive link between long-term physical health conditions and mental health problems. So living with a serious, ongoing or life-threatening physical health condition can sometimes trigger anxiety. We know that anxiety is defined now by the NHS as a symptom of long COVID, along with depression. And there's a bit of research from the Mental Health Foundation which talks about how 1 in 3 people with a long-term physical health condition also has a mental health problem. So there's a really, really big link between the two.
And yeah, thank you so much for your answer there. I was wondering, when should people seek help in this sort of situation?
Yeah, so at Mind, we think it's really, really important that you seek help at any time, even if you're not sure if you're experiencing a mental health problem or not. You don't need a diagnosis to have what's going on for you validated. So you should always seek help if you're not feeling quite right, if you're not feeling 100%, if you can identify with some of those symptoms that I've listed above. But you might want to have a look at seeking some help if you find yourself worrying more than you usually would, if you're finding it really hard to kind of enjoy yourself, enjoy your life, and if you're having thoughts and feelings that are really difficult to cope with, and yeah, if they're having an impact on your day-to-day life, we would suggest booking that initial appointment with your GP, talking to someone close to you, seeking some support. There are lots of options for support out there. Some are more suitable for people than others, or more easily available. And there's no sort of right or wrong way to try try these things in. Different things work for different people, but we do have a lot of information on our website about treatment for anxiety in particular, and we'll send that round at the end. But we also have information more generally about seeking help for a mental health problem, like how to prepare for that initial, if you're worried about booking an appointment with your GP to discuss how you're feeling, like how can you prepare for that, how can you pluck up the courage, what are the sort of things I should be talking about or saying. We have a lot of information about that as well, which we'll send round at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we've got some great questions from the COVID aid support community members and other people on social media. The first few questions that we have are around a similar sort of theme, so I'll ask those and get your responses. The first of those is from Lynn, and she asks how to manage feeling balanced and positive when everything is different and your body doesn't feel like you anymore.
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Michael. I think it's, as Amy mentioned, we know that the impact of living with a long-term physical health problem on your mental health can be a significant factor in sort of feelings of anxiety, depression. I think when you're managing a long-term condition like that, it's you're going through so many physical changes, and if you're not feeling balanced and positive, the first thing to say is that that's completely understandable. I think that there are some things that you can do to support yourself if you're experiencing kind of low mood or just sort of feeling a bit down, and I'm going to list a few, but you know, it's worth saying that we totally understand that this is not a cure for long COVID, and that some of the tips might be harder depending on the situation that you're in. I'm sorry, I'm assuming that that's what Lynn is experiencing, but for any sort of physical health problem, I think. So one thing is to try keeping a mood diary. Some people like to note down their feelings each day. That can help you identify kind of things that make you feel worse and things that make you feel better, and it just kind of gives you a better understanding of your own mental health and what affects it. Some people like mindfulness, which can be a good way of sort of trying to step away from the thing in the immediate moment that is kind of causing you difficult feelings and kind of develop the skills to deal with that. And there are sort of various online courses and apps, some of which I think we signpost to on our website. But also to say that isn't for everyone, and if it doesn't work for you, then that's totally fine. Another kind of great mood booster is we're understanding a lot more now about the sort of positive effects of nature on our mood, and I appreciate that sort of getting out and about can be quite difficult for some of us, but there are things that you can do to sort of bring nature in, and some of these might just sound like really facile, but actually there's evidence behind them. So, you know, opening a window to let the fresh air in and sort of look out onto nature, having a pot plant that you can tend to and take care of, listening to sounds from nature like birdsong. These can all have a positive effect on our moods. And then another thing that we know works for some people is, I think on our website we call it a self-care box. It doesn't have to be a box. It could be just a kind of a list that you've got of things that you go to that you know can help boost your kind of your good feelings. So you know, that might be a favorite film, book, music to listen to that makes you feel better, kind of comforting, blankets or clothes, things that when you sort of put them on, they're reassuring. You could think of it as a sort of mental health first aid kit. So those are some of the things that you can try when you're sort of feeling out of balance. But we'd also say, and I know Amy's already said this, that if that is something you're feeling and you are struggling with those feelings, then to try opening up to someone If you don't feel able to speak to a GP about that at this point, then if there's someone close to you that you can talk to about your feelings, that can be a really positive first step.
A couple of questions, unique but along a similar theme, are from Sue and Ali. Sue says, I find it hard to stop thinking about what I've lost through being ill and how much it has set me back from where I should be. Ali says, I'm finding it very frustrating at my slow lack of improvement, which sometimes makes me very down. Any tips? And I think both of those, there's themes around frustration and not being quite where they want to be at this time.
I can hear that. And I think, you know, as before, these are all completely understandable feelings when you're dealing with a kind of health problem that is stopping you living the life that you lived before. I think in that, I think it was Sue, that the sort of, some of the language she used was kind of similar to experiences of like loss and grief. And I think that is, that's kind of important to acknowledge, that we are sort of, we're not the person that we were before, and there's a kind of coming to terms with that, that is part of the process. I think some of the self-care tips are still sort of relevant here. I think to the person that said about feeling frustrated at their sort of slow lack of improvement, I think that, again, totally understandable. I think some things that we sort of suggest with sort of people who are feeling depressed is to kind of try pacing yourself, have some small wins at first. You know, that might be, today I am going to get out of bed, or today I am going to make myself something nice to eat. If you're able to do something like that, and then sort of try building up, you know, to today I'm going to have a conversation with someone, whether that's over the phone or what. And, you know, yeah, there are going to be days when you can't even do that. And that's fine. But then the next day, if you're feeling a little bit better and you can start building up again, it's just kind of focusing on the things that feel achievable to you at that moment. And then I know this is really hard, but we always say, if you can avoid comparing yourself to other people, then that could help, especially if you sort of feel like other people are making progress, whatever that means, sort of more progress than you. So for instance, you might want to limit the time you spend on social media to days when you're feeling up to it, or to only sort of checking in on people that you know will sort of help you to feel good about where you're at. And that's totally fine to say that for now, that you've got to prioritize yourself and your own recovery. And I think I sort of don't want to brush over the point about sort of the person made about sort of losing something through being ill. And so this might sound strange, but we do have information on bereavement. And some of that might apply, because it is about sort of coming to terms with a change.
Yeah, I think that's something that's very important to say, because actually I know from one of the previous Q&As we did, I think with Crew's bereavement support, we talked about the nature of grief, and sometimes people don't feel like they can talk about experiences which are very traumatic for them, because they feel like somebody else may have suffered more or may have lost more, but that doesn't mean that their own experiences aren't entirely valid for those reasons.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Got a question from Karen, who says, I'm finding it very hard seeing friends and family going outside and acting like everything is normal again. Now I feel anxious to do so.
That's a great question. Thank you so much for asking it. So we know that so many people have felt apprehensive and very anxious about the gradual easing of lockdown restrictions in the UK in the last year or so. When we conducted one of our COVID-19 studies, I think it was in July 2021, there was like over half of adults and young people had concerns about transitioning to seeing and being near others, and this particularly continues for people who are living with long COVID. And what we want to say is that it's really understandable to be experiencing difficult feelings about the last 2.5 years that we've been through. There is most definitely no normal response to a pandemic. I think a lot of us have learned that. And with many of us, our feelings might change and fluctuate from day to day, and they might be affected by things that are really outside of your control, such as living with a long-term health condition. What I would say in response to this question is trying to find people who understand what you're going through. So you might want to think about talking to those closest to you, who you might normally see and interact with in person, and they may be able to relate and offer their support, and they also might be open to making adjustments to support you when communicating with them. And we know that it can sometimes be really, really difficult to talk about your feelings with your friends and family. You might feel worried about upsetting people you care about, or you might be anxious about what people might think of you, or how it might affect your relationships with other people. But one thing we do know is that those closest to us can often be a really valuable source of support. So have a think about how your friends and family can better support you. You could, if you want to, you can write this down as well. You don't have to say this in person. Find a method of communication that works well for you. And another thing with this is thinking about what you can control and kind of what makes you feel safe. So, for example, if you are invited to a social event or a gathering or something that you're quite anxious about, maybe talk to the person about how you're feeling in advance. You could maybe suggest an alternative method of communication, such as a phone call, a Zoom call, or even a voice note. Most people are using voice notes these days. I definitely do. Maybe suggesting things that somebody else can do to help you feel more comfortable. So, for example, if you're meeting somebody inside, maybe asking them to wear a mask, or meeting outside rather than indoors. So really having to think about what would make me feel more comfortable with this situation. However, we know that there are a lot of people who don't feel comfortable seeing people at all right now, and that is also okay. We really want to acknowledge that, and it's okay to take things at your own pace and what is comfortable for you. But we think opening up to others and expressing those concerns and talking about how these situations make you feel and why they make you feel that way can be a good start. But it's really important to take these things step by step and at your own pace.
Thank you very much. We've got a final question for the moment, though, as mentioned, if anybody, any of the attendees want to ask an additional question, please do so via chat, or you can raise your hand and ask after this. But yeah, we got a question from David, who says, I have been feeling increasingly lonely this year and unsure about what I can do. Yeah,
thank you for that question. It's a really good one. So firstly, being lonely is nothing to be ashamed of, and everyone can feel lonely at some point in their lives. And something we talk about at Mind is that you don't have to be alone to feel lonely. Loneliness comes in so many forms. So if you're maybe thinking, but I feel really lonely and I've got so many people around me, that's really common. And yeah, it's not limited to being on your own necessarily, but many people during the last 2.5 years have experienced increased feelings of loneliness and isolation. We've been prevented from meeting with people. We've been prevented from attending social events and gatherings. And as restrictions are easing, if you have long COVID or you're living with a long-term illness, you might not be, as Karen mentioned above, you might not be comfortable with meeting people in person right now. So that can really contribute feelings. The study that I mentioned earlier proved this. The sort of COVID-19 consequences on mental health showed that the loneliness and the isolation and the lack of personal contact with others made people's mental health worse. If loneliness is, as I said, it's common to feel lonely from time to time, but if it's starting to have an impact on you and your mental health and the way you live your life, we have some tips and we have some ideas of things that you might want to try and do. So something that we talk about is surrounding your space with people that you love and care about. So putting pictures up of people that you care about. So having a nice reminder of the people in your life who are close to you. Try to, if you can and feel able to, join a class or a group that might be based on your hobbies or your interests. If you're unable to attend things in person or you don't feel able to, there are still lots of online groups running that you would be able to join. This kind of the partial good thing about the pandemic is that a lot of things are a little bit easier to access. Similarly, volunteering is a really good way of meeting and interacting with people who share similar interests to you. And the feeling and satisfaction of helping other people has been proven to really boost and help improve your mental health. This is something I do, actually, quite a lot. If your home is feeling too quiet, stick something on in the background that's quite chatty, so a television show or a podcast, so just so it's not the kind of dull, if you are physically on your own, the sort of dull sound of nothing. You feel like you've got conversation around you and kind of feel like you have people talking with you and around you. I find that really helpful, actually, and I've used that tactic quite a lot. So we have an online community at Mind called Side by Side. There are quite a lot of online communities out there. I believe COVID-19 has one. So and these are communities that provide a supportive place for people to listen and share with other people who have similar experiences to you. And it might be that you want to join an online community that focuses specifically on long COVID, or it might be that you want to join a community like Side by Side, which is a little bit more sort of generally mental health focused, but they're really accessible. They're mostly free, and you can access them wherever you are. So we'd really recommend having a look to see what's available. And as Kerry's mentioned this earlier in terms of self-care, and we all talk about self-care and what that is and what that isn't, but it's taking time to look after yourself is so important. It can be easy when we have feelings of loneliness to sort of neglect the basic things, and making sure you're trying to get enough sleep and eating well. So as Kerry said, if that's one of the small steps in your day, that means that you've ticked that off and you've said, I've made breakfast for myself today. That's a massive win, and celebrating those massive wins. Kerry mentioned as well, spending time in nature, whatever that means to you and whatever you are capable, whatever you feel capable of doing at that time as well. Some people find that being around animals really helps with loneliness. So if you have a pet, or some people like to visit like a local community or a city farm or something like that. So there's tactics and there's lots of different things that you can do, but as I mentioned in the previous question, it's so important that you do what you feel comfortable with and don't put any pressure on yourself, and take it step by step and at your own pace. And we do also have, I feel like I'm plugging the information quite a lot, but we do also have a lot of information about loneliness on our website, which has a lot of really useful tips that I've not covered just now that we can send around at the end.
Thank you so much. And in terms of other questions, if anybody wants to ask those right now, I've seen that there is a message, thanks for that, Gosi, around peer groups. I think actually after that, Amy, you did speak about that side of things. And it's also
you
something.
Got that in just as I was typing that out, actually.
Good timing.
I must have read your mind.
Quite possibly. Yeah, so from my perspective, I mean, a lot of what I've heard has been, sort of made a lot of sense, and stuff that we've probably around this table, this literal table, heard before to some extent. I work in the cancer sector, so I work for Cancer Support Scotland, and there are a couple of aspects of people affected with cancer in terms of not only symptoms, the impact of their symptoms, the impact of their life journey and lived experience on their mental health, but also the other aspect of how COVID and now long COVID is affecting them. So to a practical level, one of the major symptoms, and I suppose there's still a lot of research to be done, there's still a lot of new and emerging developments happening with regards to this pandemic, but certainly fatigue is a massive one, fatigue and tiredness. And while a number of the techniques that you have supplied and talked about here, I'm sure would be very, very effective, I think for people who are living with multiple health conditions, the impact of those health conditions in themselves, along with long COVID, actually restricts them even further in terms of how they then have the ableness and willingness to deal with their mental capacities and their general mental health. So I just wondered, you've said that you have a lot of information, and I just wondered whether your research was taking you down the line of looking at condition-specific groups and how long COVID is impacting on them. This is a conversation I've had with Michael from time to time, and I'd be really keen to see how that plays out so that we're getting this information directly to people that need it. I don't think that GPs are the best people to actually signpost for this kind of scenario. I think that GPs, particularly with the kind of groups that we are working with, which is anybody affected by cancer, so either by diagnosis, caring role, or bereavement, the GP quite often is firstly the last place that you can actually get an appointment within 2 to 3 weeks. And then secondly, from a time perspective, really difficult for them to allocate time. And sometimes they don't know about some of the charities like ourselves that help specifically with health and well-being. So just wondered what your sort of, how you're looking to the horizon even with regards, sort of disease-specific cohorts within the population and long COVID.
Yeah, you've raised some really excellent points there, and I will try to answer them, but if I don't, then just come back at me. I think looking specifically at kind of, other long-term conditions and long COVID is probably something that we would be looking to do through our partnership work. So we work with a lot of other organisations to reach specific groups of people. Our capacity is limited, and we have to focus primarily on kind of mental health information, but where it relates to other specific conditions, we try to work in partnership with other people. So we are, for instance, working with Cancer Research on some video content at the moment about managing mental health impact of cancer diagnosis and treatment, but I don't think that is specifically in relation to long COVID, for instance. I think that is, again, it's kind of just a bit more general than that. And your point about GPs, I totally get what you're saying, that sometimes your GP is the last person you want to speak to or feel you can speak to. And there are other options. So I know you mentioned in your question, I was about to reply when Amy got there before me, about sort of peer support which is great. There's also kind of charities and local organisations that run kind of support services. That might be peer support, that might be access to talking therapies, like you don't have to go through your GP to access talking therapies like counselling or CBT. So I mentioned at the beginning of the session that we've got a network of local minds, so you could look up local minds near you to see what kinds of support groups or services they run. But we also, sorry, it's another signpost to our website, but we do also list other more specialist organisations in our sort of useful contacts, which we can share links to.
I just wanted to add to that, it isn't actually a mind signpost, but you mentioned a lot about fatigue. So I used to work for Macmillan Cancer Support, and they do, you've probably seen it or heard of it already, but they do an incredible printed resource about fatigue and cancer treatment that if you've not come across it, I definitely would recommend ordering off their shop, because that's got some really useful tips in there.
Yeah, thanks for that. And yeah, I have seen that resource. I've seen a couple of really good resources from national cancer charities here, but I think my point was, you know, how does that sit alongside long COVID, given that long COVID also can manifest itself a lot in fatigue? It would be great to get, you know, sort of to be able to drill down a little bit more with that. But, you know, I think that that's maybe just something that we can just keep pressing on over time. Michael, expect something in your inbox this afternoon.
I look forward to it. No, and I totally agree with what you're saying on that side of things. So yeah, I think there's a lot more that we can be doing, you know, from ourselves as COVID aid to help with that. So yeah, I want to thank everybody so much for their time in attending, and especially to Kerry and Amy-Louise. I think it's been tremendously helpful.